Welcome to the Art of Love podcast. My name is Tamar Gale, and I am here to guide you into deeper, more expansive love, freedom, and pleasure. A deep inner journey of self-discovery. Here, I will cover all types of topics pertaining to love, including self-love and self-care, relationships, Tantra, intimacy, sex, all the way to Christ Consciousness and Pachamama, just to name a few broad topics. My mission is to support you in being true to yourself, reconnecting the fragmented pieces and aspects of yourself so that you can find and use your own inner fire, Shakti power, and voice. It is time to break down the old systems that we have been taught to live by. I would love to see you align with your personal truth and nature instead of succumbing to others' views of how you should be, trying to fit inside of the box in order to be accepted, and instead standing in your power and loving all that you are, accessing a new way of being in the world. Today I have a conversation with Anita Bentada from Australia, who runs Activating Artemis, which is targeting relationship abuse for women. Anita, welcome to the Art of Love, and thank you for joining me today. Could you tell me and our audience what got you started in working with women in this profound way? Welcome to the Art of Love, and today I'm with Jane Hardwicke Collings, who's a grandmother, midwife, teacher, writer, and menstrual educator. She gives workshops in Australia and internationally on mother and daughter preparation for menstruation, the spiritual practice of menstruation, and the sacred dimensions of pregnancy, birth, and menopause. She is a modern-day women's mystery teacher. Jane founded and runs the School of Shamanic Womancraft, which is where I met her. She was my teacher. And that's an international women's mystery school. The school, through Jane and other graduate teachers, offers year and 2-year-long in-depth immersions into the self and one's relationship with all that is. The program offers a focus on know thyself and is more than anything a grand awakening for each individual woman as she comes to know who she really is when she separates herself from the misogynist power over paradigm of the patriarchal culture. A profound and epic healing happens when women reclaim their body and their functions and remember that they do not visit nature, they are nature. Jane, thank you so much for joining me today, and I'm so happy that you're here. Just a brief update, as I mentioned, Jane was my teacher and guide in the School of Shamanic Womancraft, and this was a year-long journey that brought me on this path of even starting this podcast, a path of awakening to who I am, of healing a lot of the childhood wounds that you've heard me speak about in other podcast series, in the podcast shows, and so much more of helping me reclaim my power as a woman and understanding my body. So it was really important for me to have Jane come on today and to share her infinite wisdom with us. So thank you so much, Jane.
Thank you, Tamar. It is a real honor to be with you here at this time and to see how beautifully you are bringing the women's mysteries and the art of love to all your listeners. And I would just say to them, Tamar is awesome. Thank you for being you.
Thank you, Jane. Thank you so much. And I know that you have done so much in your life. Can you share with us a little bit about how you got started in the Shamanic Womancraft women's mystery schools that you've created? What led you to creating that for women?
Yeah, well, I never imagined, here I am sitting here at 60 years old, post-menopause. I never imagined back in my youth that this would be anything that I would end up doing. So in some ways, it's a bit of a surprise to me that this is how what I would say the goddess has put me to work. So how I actually started in my life that led me to here was as a 25-year-old, so on the cusp of my transition from maiden to the mother season of my life. So that happens at around 25. All women shift into the mother season of their lives, regardless of whether they have babies or not. It's just a whole different vibration. 25 or so to menopause is like the season in our lives that is similar to summer, and it represents us as creatrix. So in that phase that I was on the cusp of, is the time when we conceive, gestate, and birth all manner of creative things besides human babies. So it could be careers, it could be projects, books, gardens, new versions of ourselves, whatever. So there I was at that very important transition moment, although I didn't realize that. Back then at 25, I was what I call a rebellious yet compliant daughter of the patriarchy. And I didn't even know there was such a thing as the patriarchy. I probably had never even heard of that word. But I was deep in that culture. I was raised in a typical patriarchal family. My father was the businessman, breadwinner of the family. My mother was the homemaker and full-time mother. And I don't know if she got him his slippers when he came home from work. I can't remember, but that would have been the style. So I was raised in my family quite knowing quite clearly that I was only a girl. So that had a massive impact on me, and mostly I was very unimpressed with that. So yet, I saw what was going on, and it appeared to be that that was a significant piece, that girls had a different story to boys. And, of course, they do, but I'm talking in terms of opportunity at that point. So there I was at 25, already a registered nurse, so I had done my 3 years nursing training. And this is way back before all of that actually all happened in universities. This is in the 70s when the student nurses were also the people who scrubbed the pans and washed the walls in the pan room and stuff. So it was pretty intense work. Anyway, on to my midwifery training is where I went at 25 because I wanted to have a baby, and I wanted to learn all about having a baby, which, had I known what I know now, would have been a clue to me about the level of information I was seeking that actually was really more about the level of control I was seeking in the experience of birth. So I didn't know that at that point, but now, knowing what I know now, that was the beginning of me really wanting to, as an adult, exercise, find out what power I had and how I could exercise that. And so there I was in my midwifery training, and it was in a big city hospital in Sydney, Australia, so like cutting-edge, state-of-the-art maternity care. And what I experienced in that midwifery training year was actually my grand awakening, really. I actually awoke to what was going on around me, and that being the patriarchal culture. Mm-hmm. And what caused me to awaken was that I was actually outraged at the way that women and babies and men were being treated in that institution. There they were, showing up to have their babies, thinking they're doing the right thing by doing whatever the doctor says and following the protocol and policies and blah, blah, blah. And basically what I witnessed as a student midwife was institutionalized acts of abuse and violence masquerading as safety. And I realized also as I was there that I was complicit in it. I was doing the things that I was told to do, which were all part of a provision of care that I saw was actually like very not good for the women and the babies. So they were disempowered through the experience. I mean, sometimes some women slipped through and quickly had a baby before that their process was taken over by the professionals, but mostly it was suboptimal to my mind. And so I just figured, oh, well, the women will realize that wasn't really a very even kind would be a word to describe experience, and it certainly was centered around the doctor as opposed to the mother. And so I figured, oh, no worries, they'll realize it and they won't come back. But then, they came back, and I was like, what is going on here? Am I the only one who's seeing that this is like not okay? And then, it seemed I was. But what I did was some more research to actually kind of figure out what actually was going on here. Why are these women coming back to a place to have their babies that they leave feeling so dependent on and disempowered by? And then I learned all about the phenomena of a rite of passage. And what that is so childbirth is a significant rite of passage, and we have several others in our lives. So for women, there's the blood mysteries or the women's mysteries rites of passage, which include menarche or menarche, however you've learned to say that, so the beginning of menstruation. And that's an initiation or a rite of passage into womanhood. And then childbirth is the next rite of passage. And actually pregnancy is a rite of passage, because every pregnancy results in a birth, regardless of whether that's a miscarriage, which I can't stand that word. Let's say early pregnancy loss, that's much more appropriate, or an abortion, or a later pregnancy loss, or a baby that doesn't make it. So every pregnancy results in a birth, whatever way it is, happens, and that should be treated like that. And then the next big rite of passage is menopause, the cessation of the menstrual cycle and the no more fertility for the woman. And then on either side of those is our own birth and our own death. And then, so they're the kind of physical, blood style rites of passage, as they're called. And then there's all the other cultural rites of passage, like marriage or graduation or new jobs, et cetera, et cetera. So they're more ones we've kind of created as a culture. And yet the other ones are, everything's significant. However, the thing about a rite of passage, and particularly the blood ones, is that it's a time of complete transformation, transmutation actually, because you can never return to what you were before. So, once a girl gets her periods, she never returns to her maiden situation where she didn't have her periods. And likewise, once a woman's pregnant, so many things change in her body and her mind that she's never the same again. And that's the same after every pregnancy too, because a mother of one is very different to a mother of 2 and 3 and blah, blah, blah. So, and then menopause, my goodness, that's like the rite of passage from heaven, so to speak, where I always imagine many people would say the rite of passage from hell. But basically it's the transformation through menopause for women is not just menopause, it's everything that's gone before. So that's the thing about rites of passage, is they all influence the next one and lead to the next one. And what happens at a rite of passage is that whatever happens, whatever is said or not said, done or not done, teaches the person going through the rite of passage on a subliminal level, which means they don't even realize they're being taught. They're being taught how their culture values, by what happens or doesn't happen, how their culture values the next role they're going into. So at menarche, that would be woman. At pregnancy, that would be mother. at menopause, that would be wise woman. So they're learning on a subliminal level how their culture values that next role by what happens, and therefore how to behave to be accepted by that culture. So I realized in learning about that that's why the women were coming back to those high-powered hospitals to have their baby, because they'd been led to believe by what had happened that was the only safe place to have a baby, and that what you must do is hand over the responsibility to the experts. I'm exaggerating this a bit, but not much, but that you need to hand over to the experts to ensure that you will be delivered safely of a baby and survive the process. So, on a subliminal level, that means that you're taught that you are you need to be with those people, otherwise it's dangerous. So that's why they kept coming back. So that was really the awakening and the massive eye-opener to me of the patriarchal culture, and also the beginning of my work of understanding rites of passage.
Wow, thank you for sharing that. And I think you touched on so many important topics that I wish we had hours to actually speak, because I think that even though I've heard you speak about these things before, every time, as we know, every time I hear you speak about it or we hear about it, we hear so many more things, and we understand on even deeper levels. It's really amazing how that happens. In rites of passage, we see so many women, especially, that struggle with the birth process and what happens after and not being accepted. And it's not just about the birthing and becoming a mother, and not having the support in our society, but we see that also with the Crohn's, and how women come to that age, and our culture and our society is just not built for honoring the wisdom that these women have. Can you speak to us a little bit about, I guess, either one of those things, because they're both quite important.
Yes, for sure. So, around birth, I think, is when women start to notice what's going on. And it's a potential time to wake up at a rite of passage. And, obviously for many people it isn't what happens too. But the big thing is that she who was initiated into womanhood at menarche, so the enculturation, which is just a nice way of saying brainwashed, the brainwashing that happens at menarche when our periods start, teach us how our culture values woman and therefore how to behave. Now, in my 30 years as a midwife, or practicing for 30 years as a home birth midwife, and in my 25 years of hearing women's stories around their rites of passage and teaching all of this, and through research that's been done and that I've been involved in, the dominant experience at menarche, so the first period, is that women are led to believe through their experiences, and that's mostly with their mother, plus or minus their father, their peers, and at school and stuff. What they, and in the main and the majority, is that most women come out of that experience internalizing the dominant perspective of menstrual shame. And what that looks like in an individual's experience is things like, oh, well, welcome to the curse. Here you go for the next 40 years. Or make sure you don't let anybody know you're bleeding. Just keep it to yourself. And whatever you do, don't leak. So there's lots of shame that gets instilled in poor little 13-year-olds or younger about hiding this process from everybody and carry on regardless. Don't don't let it be a weakness and all that kind of stuff. So like that is like potentially one of the worst ways to start womanhood. So how each person internalizes those messages creates their internal culture, which is their mindset, their beliefs, their attitudes, their fears, and it reinforces the culture of menstrual shame in the wider area. So that's who comes to birth, complete with practicing her opportunities for self-awareness and rebirth and regeneration and renewal in her menstrual cycle for however many years she's had that before she has a baby or not. So the menstrual cycle is like the perfect preparation for pregnancy and birth because it gives us the opportunity to hear what our body's telling us through feelings, physical sensations, dreams, our intuition, et cetera, and what our body wants us to do to seek comfort and healing and wellness. So that's what the menstrual cycle offers us. And that is perfect preparation for birthing and for pregnancy, birthing and mothering. But the problem here is that most women have very unconscious menstrual cycles and many switch it off chemically with using the pill, for example. And the pill actually switches off 150 mechanisms in our body at the same time as making us not ovulate. And so, those things are important. They wouldn't bloody be there if they weren't. There's some awful things to consider about the pill. One of the most frightening ones, I think, is and this is fully researched, documented, that when women are on the pill, they're attracted to men that they would not be attracted to if they were not on the pill.
I was hoping you were going to bring that up.
Yeah, that is so shocking, and when I bring that up in my workshops, there's so many groans and so many, oh, is that what happened? And the way it works is that when you're on the pill, your body is in a sort of a pseudo-pregnancy state, and so the men you're attracted to are more like family, more like kin, more like the kind of people who will, look after you when you're pregnant. And the men that women are attracted to when they're not on the pill are more like opposite to that. They're more like actually what it is their genes and the woman's genes have the most likelihood of coming together to create a person who will survive. So it's more about attracting opposite things, but not in an opposite kind of more in a chromosomal genetic way, not in a psychological way. So that's super interesting. And, who knows if anybody will ever study the divorce or relationship breaking up numbers post-pill stopping, but that would be pretty interesting. But so just to go back to the whole rite of passage thing and that is that she who was initiated into womanhood at Menarche is she who shows up at birth fully practiced in what she has to be, how she has to behave and think to be accepted as a woman in our culture. And we already know that menstrual shame leads to body shame, leads to low self-esteem, leads to dangerous sexual decision-making and other wounded feminine behaviours like eating disorders, self-harm, etc. And we know all this. This is fully documented. And we also know that menstrual shame and a disempowering menarche, if not saved from that by the woman realising what's happened, impacts how she gives birth. So because she doesn't respect and trust her body in the way of knowing that she can perform a miracle like give birth. And so as a midwife who, I know that birth is critical, and it's critical for the mother and the father, but so critical for the baby because it sets up their life. And also sets up what's going to happen next in their rite of passage, etc. Like it's an ongoing snowballing thing. And as a midwife, I know that our future is dependent on so many things, but how people are born. So one of my main missions is to do what we can to ensure gentle birth. And that could happen in whatever way the baby was being born, but gentle, respectful, kind birth. Treating the baby as a sentient being, which it is, and treating the mother as her experience is creating her as a mother. So the menarche, the beginning of the menstrual cycle, is actually a place in a woman's life when we can do positive intervention by if we welcome our daughters to womanhood in an empowering way where we give her the information about how to look after her body and the responsibility she has to do that, not just for herself but for the earth and for all her relations, then she is not going to show up to her birth and just roll over when some expert says to her, actually, you need to do what I say because I'm the expert and I know your body better than you. She's going to say, excuse me, how could you possibly know my body better than me? I mean, I am my body, and I've been practicing knowing how my body communicates with me for years with my menstrual cycle, et cetera, et cetera. So that's one of the main missions of our time now, is to really bring consciousness to the puberty rites of passage of our girls and boys, of course, because that's critical as well. So our menarche impacts how we birth, and then one rite of passage leads to the next, and then our menstrual cycle is there ongoingly through those 40 fertile years for us to be able to do all the healing and personal development, so to speak, that we could possibly want, so that then when we come to our menopause, it's menopause, so as a midwife, I thought there couldn't possibly be a rite of passage more transformational than giving birth until I reached menopause. And really menopause, and a lot's been written about it now, and I'm so glad about that, because besides the menstrual cycle, menopause has been classified as taboo in our culture and in that kind of category of, we don't talk about that. So now it is being talked about. One of my main pieces of work right now is helping corporate cultures introduce menstrual and menopause workplace policies. So, it's coming out of the taboo status and into the how can we actually we can't pretend anymore that women don't menstruate. It's like it's not a pretending thing anymore. So rather than trying to shame it away, the complete healed version of that is how can we actually support women in their cycles, and in this case at work. So basically the menopause, which is so transformational, is, as Dr. Christian Northrup calls it, the mother of all wake-up calls. It's the rite of passage that's designed, so to speak, to heal all the unhealed parts of us so that we can go on into our wise woman years, the second half of our life, because, average age is 50. So, we're going to live to 100, say. So it's the initiation into our wise woman years, the second half of our life, the autumn and the winter seasons. So you want to be going into that as healthy as possible and clear of all your psychodramas that you've talked yourself into believing, so that you can be an empowered wise woman, because that's what our world needs, is empowered wise women to lead the way and leading our families, leading in our workplaces, etc., rather than disappeared away, which is the current sort of way that postmenopausal women are dealt with. So really the whole thing about rites of passage is that it's where we can do positive intervention to shift generations and generations of negative, disempowering, reinforced situations, and the individual's healing so that they can move forward in a whole way, and collectively for everybody, because I don't think that change will stick in our world until women actually show up in their power. Not just show up, but show up in their power. And what I mean by that is with a healed perspective of their menstrual cycle, a healed perspective of their body and their body's processes, and a welcoming of the transformation that's available every menstrual cycle and every birthing experience and menopause. You know, like it's also such a cultural thing because, for example, in traditional Chinese medicine, menopause is referred to as the second spring. So, you know, they value their wise women. Our culture, like there's the dodgy, dominant sort of mythic thing that happens where postmenopausal women are replaced by a younger version, which is, you know, pretty common and very dodgy.
Yep. Yeah, you see that a lot in our culture, which is quite sad, and it's kind of what I'm glad you touched on that, because I still see a lot of women where I come from, and we see it everywhere, but who struggle with the menopause phase and thinking that they're going crazy, and just our society doesn't know how to take that. You know, we've never been taught, you know, the menopause is our second spring, or the possibilities that come with menopause, you know?
And the responsibilities for the postmenopausal woman.
Yeah.
You know, like so often in our culture, women try to still fit into the roles and perspectives that they had and that they enjoyed pre-menopause. But the thing is that the postmenopausal woman is a completely new creature, and she doesn't even know, like pre-menopause and post-menopause, the pre-menopause woman doesn't even know who she's going to be post-menopause, because she's never operated on the hormonal cocktail, so to speak, that she will postmenopausally. So she's a whole different person, and she's changed, and that affects everybody and everything in every relationship that she has. And yet our culture, we try to pretend that's not happening, and that's part of the biggest problem. One of the best things I've ever heard about the shift there into postmenopause and the change that a woman goes through is from one of the Aboriginal law women here in my home country of Australia. Law as in L-A-W and L-O-R-E, so the stories. And in their culture, and there's many different language groups and different sort of First Nations, so to speak, within Australia. They're all a bit different, but they all have similarities. But in her particular language group, as they're called, the role of the Mimi, which is their term for the postmenopausal woman, is to not carry on regardless or pick up where you left off, not to renegotiate your life situation such that you can carry on and do the same things, etc. It's something completely different. She said the role of the Mimi is not the same as the role of the mother. The role of the Mimi is to weave the dreams for the grandchildren. Mm-hmm. So, you know, like that is so important. And how I've interpreted that is what I see in women in the postmenopausal years is that different things matter. And the things that do matter are the things that their long-term thinking brings up and weaving the dreams for the grandchildren, things like making sure there is going to be something for the grandchildren, you know, like food or clean air or clean water or whatever. So many postmenopausal women begin to fight for those sorts of things with such a passion and such a fierceness. So as a culture, for us to actually work with and alongside the fierce feminine as she looks in her postmenopausal years will be to all our benefits, particularly the grandchildren and the great-grandchildren. You know, that postmenopausal woman can have a perspective on the future that a mother can't because she's so busy in the here and now, and that a maiden shouldn't have to, you know. So, yeah.
I see my mom going through that because she's postmenopausal. And just the change in her, now that you've been speaking about that, going back and noticing how much she's changed since, well, I guess in probably the past 5 years. Yeah, and she's retiring this year. And so she's really focused on what she can create in the world and what she's going to do with that. And all of a sudden she's really excited. And for her, for a while, she was scared of retiring. She didn't want to quit. She loved it. But something switched in her about a year ago, and she's just, I can't wait to retire. I can't wait to do something else. And, you know, she's just so excited. And I really see that, that she's really changed. Changed her direction, changed in her passion for what she wants to do in the world. And just watching that has been really interesting for me to see that, to see her empowered in her decision has been really great. Yeah.
Awesome. I should mention also the other thing that often happens to women around rites of passage, and particularly around birthing rites of passage, is what's called a shadow awakening. So what that means is that for many women, myself included, this was the next level of my waking up, when things don't go to plan, and particularly around birth, you know, like that the birth that you were imagining for yourself, wanting for yourself, perhaps even written out a birth plan for, actually doesn't end up being what happens. And often in that case, it can be a traumatic birth and a highly interventionist birth. And that's not to say that it's only high interventionist births that can be traumatic, because any birth can be traumatic. And it's so often traumatic because of how the carers do or don't look after you. But in terms of a traumatic birth experience or a highly interventionist birth experience, that is unfortunately the norm in our high-tech birth environments, that what can happen is a woman can come out of that experience and be like, what happened to me? Why did that happen? How did that happen? Etc. So then this phenomena of a shadow awakening happens when she asks of the experience, how does this serve? What did this teach me about myself and the way of things? And obviously the way that's supported and guided has a huge effect on it, because it could also just turn into further evidence of how my body doesn't work, or I'm not strong, or I can't do anything I want to do, or whatever. If she's helped through the process of a shadow awakening debrief, what she can find in the journey of that is what the experience teaches her about herself, and the connection between that and her menstrual cycle experience and her menarche experience and her red thread or motherline experience, because how our rites of passage unfold are usually just the culmination of our mindset at that moment, you know, like, and the red thread experience, because wherever we are just the latest version of our ancestry, playing out whatever our ancestry always has, unless we go, oh, hang on, I'm not going to do that again. I'm the one that's going to stop this pattern in my red thread, my family line. But, that doesn't always happen. But in the shadow awakening, if a woman is helped in her debrief, she can see actually what her birth, the traumatic experience offers her as for her soul crafting, for her understanding of her journey, what she needs to know about herself and the way of things so she can evolve, so to speak, in her self-awareness and power. So the shadow awakening is a very powerful opportunity for women to make sense of their traumatic birth experiences and see even actually right down to the theme of their lives and therefore their life purpose. So these experiences hold so much information that we are not paying attention to, and which offer us like a path forward of great awakening.
Amazing. Jane, thank you so much for sharing all of your wisdom with me today, with us. And is there anything else that you would like to say before we close for today?
Yeah, well, I think it's time for everybody to wake up.
Yes.
Yeah, wake up time.
It is. It's definitely wake up time. Jane, thank you so much. Thank you so much for joining me today. I really appreciate it.
Thank you, Tamar.
And I'm going to post the links to your website with the podcast, and also the link to the school, the school of the Women's Shamanic School of Womancraft, so that everyone knows where to find you, because I definitely, of course, highly recommend the school, as it's moved me on my path so far. And it's a lot of what I teach is coming from Jane as well. So the women's cycles and everything. So I would love for everyone to have your information.
Wonderful. Thank you.
And thank you, everyone, for joining us for The Art of Love. And I look forward to connecting with you again next Wednesday.